From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
A federal judge issues a gag order against President Trump as House Republicans gather to try again to elect a new Speaker of the House. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnists Bill McGurn and Kim Strassel. The hearing at the federal courthouse was a contentious one with Judge Tanya Chutkan and the lawyer representing President Donald Trump. It involved his statements on social media and potential statements on social media and resulted in a gag order that was issued, and the judge confirmed from the bench that she would do that. We finally got a look at the text of the order itself today. And here's a piece of it. It says, since his indictment and even after the government filed the instant motion, defendant has continued to make similar statements attacking individuals involved in the judicial process, including potential witnesses, prosecutors, and court staff. The judge then adds, the court finds that such statements pose a significant and immediate risk that witnesses will be intimidated or otherwise unduly influenced by the prospect of being themselves targeted for harassment or threats, and attorneys, public servants, and other court staff will themselves become targets for threats and harassment. And here is Donald Trump reacting to this. I believe this is outside of the New York courthouse where the civil case against him and his business organization is taking place. But he's responding to the gag order in this federal case on the attempt to overturn the 2020 election.
We're being railroaded. And I have other trials where being railroaded. You saw yesterday where they take away my right to speak. I won't be able to speak like I'm speaking to you. And I'm not saying anything wrong. I'm saying the truth. I won't be able to do this with that trial because the judge, which of course we're appealing, because the judge said basically I don't have a right to speak. And I'm the number one candidate leading the Republicans by 55 or 60 points. That should be over. And leading Joe Biden. And I'm being restricted. My speech has been taken away from me. I'm a candidate that's running for office, and I'm not allowed to speak.
Bill, what do you make of these arguments from Judge Chutkan and then from Donald Trump?
Well, in theory, the judge is right. The courtroom has to have decorum. You can't attack the officers of the court. And, if you were in court doing this, a judge would likely cite you for contempt. However, former President Trump is a leading Republican candidate for 2024. He's running for office, and he has a point. I don't know how they enforce this gag order. I guess they could throw him in jail, but that will only feed the idea that Trump is running on, which is that he's being a martyr. They're all after him. And let's remember, the people who brought these charges, the Attorney General, campaigned for office on the idea that she was going after Donald Trump. We in the political class tend to look at these as isolated things, but Trump supporters look at it all as one. They look at it as just another effort to get Trump. I think it's going to create more problems than it solves. They probably should just let Trump spout and sputter on Truth Social and Twitter. So I think it's a giant mess, as all these trials will be, because Trump is not making a legal case. He's making a campaign case. He's writing how all the authorities in liberal America are going after him. And in some ways, they're violating norms, campaigning for a prosecutor against him. And I think he's getting sympathy for that from his supporters. I mean, that's why we see him not sinking in the polls when this would probably kill most of the candidates.
Kim, to my mind, this is sort of a tricky balance. I agree with Bill that these kinds of statements, things that Trump is saying on social media, would not be put up with if President Trump were any old defendant. Just to provide another example, so this is now the second gag order that has been issued against President Trump. The first came in that New York civil case. President Trump on Truth Social posted a photograph, allegedly, of the judge's law clerk standing next to Senator Chuck Schumer, mocking her as Schumer's girlfriend and trying to make some case that he's being railroaded. I mean, I don't know the context of that photograph. Chuck Schumer is a senator in New York, has been a senator for a long time. It could have been that the clerk saw him at a social event or something like that and said, hey, can I get a picture with my senator, the senator from New York? It could be as simple as that, or it could be that she has a background in politics, as some people who end up going to law school and even becoming judges do. And that doesn't mean that they can't set aside whatever personal feelings they have, as they are asked to do when they join the judiciary, and look at cases fairly. On the other hand, at the very least, I think this order from Judge Chutkan might prove to be overbroad. One of the things that she was grappling with in the hearing, and you could hear that, is how this pertains to people who are witnesses, including Vice President Mike Pence, who is obviously a key player in what happened on January 6th, but is also someone who could be called to testify in this federal case. And the judge seemed to suggest that the way that she would draw the order, or the way she would interpret her order, is to allow President Trump to attack the vice president for all manner of things. But then she said, quote, "You may not criticize Mr. Pence about the events in this case," unquote. And I don't understand how that can hold up. Imagine if the next Republican debate is held and President Trump decides to participate. He's standing up there with Mike Pence. He gets asked a question, as we've seen at previous debates, about whether Pence did the right thing on January 6th or not. How can the judge say that he is not allowed to answer that question?
Right. I mean, I think you're making a central point here, Kyle, because look, I agree with you and Bill that we need to have some sort of decorum in courtrooms, obviously. But this is unprecedented. And as Bill noted, it's why everything is so messy, because the government itself decided to take unprecedented and uncharted steps when it went down this road. And so in my mind, that therefore argues for the broadest interpretation of political speech, of free speech that you can get, which is what's not happening here. I mean, here's something the judge said during the hearing. She said, "Mr. Trump can certainly claim he's being unfairly prosecuted, but I cannot imagine any other criminal case in which a defendant is permitted to call the prosecutor deranged or a thug, and I will not permit it here simply because the defendant is running a political campaign." End quote. Let's unpack that for a second. You could have stopped her sentence as after the words, "I cannot imagine any other criminal case," because who of us could imagine any other criminal case that looks like this? Nobody would have ever thought it possible that the administration of a sitting president would bring a prosecution against the former president and the leading contender for the opposing nomination. And then this kind of lighthearted, well, simply because the defendant is running a political campaign. This obviously isn't any political campaign. It's not as though we're talking about someone running for Republican dog catcher. We're talking about someone running for the president of the United States. And again, I think all of which would argue for the most expansive view of free speech, which is not something that she seems to have been looking at. The other thing, too, I would just note, just because I think it also gets to your point, Kyle, is that to the extent when you read through her actual order that it came out, the judge itself, it certainly sounds all tidy and legalese, but there's some flaws in some of the thinking she put out there. She cited a prior Supreme Court case, Seattle Times versus Reinhardt, that talked about and quoted the court as saying the sort of need to put some limits on free speech when it came to court proceedings. That was actually a case that dealt with civil litigation. And so it's a little bit different. This is obviously a criminal case. And with regard to that, she also mentioned some other lines talking about criminal cases, but they were said by courts in the context of protecting a criminal defendant and their right to a free trial. So that's a very different scenario than what we're talking about here. She's essentially saying that she has to silence the defendant in order to protect the government and its case. And I'm not quite sure how that is going to sit with higher courts, which I think this is where this is destined to go.
I've heard a couple of legal analysts saying that there is not great First Amendment precedent explaining the limits of these kinds of gag orders. And one other thing I would throw out here is I understand the instinct of judges to protect low-level court functionaries, people who are generally anonymous to the public and could become targets of harassment if they are posted to Trump's Truth Social account with photographs of them, for example. But to the extent that this protects Special Counsel Jack Smith, I also find that sort of odd in that Jack Smith is a political figure in his own right, a senior Justice Department official reporting to the Attorney General and, in effect, to the president of the opposition party. And so, Bill, it is a tricky situation. This is a unprecedented prosecution. We've never had a former president, a presidential candidate who's been under indictment like this. On the other hand, part of what makes this unprecedented is Donald Trump's inability or disinclination to control his behavior here. I mean, if you don't think the judge is on your side, boy, wait until you start attacking the judge's law clerks and posting photographs of his law clerks. It seems to me that if you're a defense attorney, man, this is not the kind of client that you want to have.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, there's almost nothing precedented about Donald Trump. You know, he's unique in so many areas. I can't imagine any other defendant posting a picture as he did of that clerk next to and calling her Schumer's girlfriend or something. That said, Jack Smith is a very controversial prosecutor. Remember, he was rebuked by unanimous Supreme Court for how he went after the former governor of Virginia. And I think he was a bad choice to be a special prosecutor. So there's all these different problems swirling around. I don't believe Donald Trump is unable to restrain himself. I believe this is deliberate. He knows the legal case against him, not on all charges, but on some charges, is pretty strong. He's got to be convicted of one of these many counts. He's running a political campaign, and that's why he does what he does. And in terms of generating support for himself as a man unfairly pursued by the government, you know, first the FBI and the intelligence agencies with the Russia hoax, and now these prosecutors, he's managed to parlay that into a lot of support in the Republican Party. So I think it's deliberate. Will he pay a price, as you suggest, during the trial? Maybe, and probably. But I think he's not appealing to that audience. He'll deal with that when he can. He probably thinks he's going to lose anyway. So what he's going to do is try to question their moral legitimacy. And I go back to the thing, judges have a right to maintain some sort of decorum in their courtrooms and not let, especially low-level staffers, be attacked. However, I think in this case, just the sheer difficulty of drawing lines, as you mentioned, there's no First Amendment precedents, or very few in this category. The problem is going to be in drawing lines and enforcing this gag order without appearing very unfair. As we pointed out in the editorial we had on this, we believe Donald Trump probably welcomes the gag order because it feeds his main campaign theme that he's being martyred.
Kim, that raises an interesting point. Is this exactly what President Trump wants as he is trying to build a political case that he is being railroaded? I tend to agree with Bill that it might have been wiser for Judge Chutkan to hold off, at least for the moment, let him attack Jack Smith and so forth, and wait for something that she feels is truly over the line related to calling out of court staff or jurors, or again, low-level anonymous witnesses, not somebody like Mike Pence who has his own platform, but somebody like congressional staff or someone who is getting called in to testify. Maybe that would be the point to draw the line. And it does raise the question of, now she has put forth this order, how does she really intend to enforce it if President Trump is pushing the boundary? Maybe he doesn't call Jack Smith a thug, but maybe he calls him a politically motivated hack or something like that.
Well, there's so many questions about that. For instance, by the way, it's not as though Jack Smith is only prosecuting Donald Trump on January 6th. He's also prosecuting him over the classified documents case. the judge there. I mean, can Donald Trump call him a thug in the capacity of that litigation, but not a thug in the capacity of the January 6th litigation? It's a very complicated thing. Look, the preemptive nature of this, her decision to put it out before there was something that she actually decided she was going to go after him for, I think works to Donald Trump's advantage, both legally and politically. Legally, that may well help him as he decides to pursue this and takes it up the legal ladder by saying, look, this is just sweeping. It's not in response to a specific thing. It's too broad and too unmanageable for it to be allowed to exist or maintain. But also politically, as you were both suggesting, an enormous part of Donald Trump's campaign this time is saying that the government is out to get him. And not only do we now have an unprecedented couple of prosecutions, but we now have an unprecedented gag order that everyone acknowledges is a novel and first of its kind. And Donald Trump is going to use that to his benefit. One more thing I would just point out, which jumped out at me, and the judge's order that she put out, because I think it undercuts her own argument, is she made the case that, what Donald Trump was doing was incredibly terrible, but also that it was lasting damage. And that she pointed out, in an age of the internet, that these sort of comments, once they are out there, that they are, quote, largely irreversible. Well, that to me would argue that, if it's out there, if it's done, if he's already called Jack Smith a thug and deranged, how does it help to now censor him going forward from doing the same if it's, as she says, now just part of the public argument or the public case because of the internet? So there's a lot, I think, in her order that could be difficult for her if this does get appealed, which again, I think it will.